All right, so now we're going to take a closer look at the death of Breonna Taylor. The 27-year-old African-American woman was shot and killed inside her Louisville home by police when they were conducting a no-knock warrant raid. As protests across the country continue to rage against police brutality in the wake of George Floyd's deadly arrest, some activists and scholars wonder where the outrage and coverage is for unarmed Black women who have died at the hands of police officers as well. The University of Florida law professor Michelle S. Jacobs is going to join us now to talk about this. Michelle, you know, right now we're talking about Breonna Taylor, and you're seeing the hashtag Say Her Name, but Say Her Name started before Breonna Taylor. It's not just her, it's Tatiana Jefferson, who was killed in her home while she was playing video games with her nephew. It's Ayanna Stanley Jones, just 7, who was killed in her home when police were conducting a raid. And though these are high-profile cases, it certainly seems like men get much more attention in the media. When it comes to protests, there's much more outrage. So can we start this conversation by talking about women who are the victims of police abuse versus Black men, Black women versus Black men, and whether or not there is a difference and what those differences are?
Sure, those are great questions, and there are differences, obviously. The differences are for a number of complicated reasons, but at the very first level, we have to look at how the media treats the death of Black women at the hands of the police. And if you actually look through the published news articles about the deaths of so many Black women who have died at the hands of the police, what you'll see is that very few of them reach the level of national press coverage, and those that do only last for one news cycle. So even though Breonna Taylor was killed in March, we're not really getting press on her in the U.S. until May. And the same was true with Tatiana Jefferson. And, you know, there are just so many women who die at the hands of the police and their stories never reach the media. So we really do have to ask why that happens. And the bottom line, the hard answer is that it's probably because American media doesn't care about the deaths of Black women. This is not a new issue with American media. We've seen it play out several times before. And the fact of the matter is, I believe, in the eyes of the media, the death of a Black woman is not going to get you clicks on your digital site or viewers' eyes on your live broadcast. So since you can't monetize that, you can't go to your advertisers and say, look how many people came in to hear about the death of this Black woman. You just simply don't cover it. I will say that I see in the protests much more, many more people with signs that are being held up for Breonna Taylor and the other women that have been killed. So I think at a community level, we're seeing increased recognition of the importance of talking about the women's stories, but at a media level, we're not seeing it.
It's so important what you say, Professor Jacobs, and I encourage all of our viewers to check out your writings on this at the University of Florida website, because you've got this incredibly detailed research piece. It's called The Violent State, Black Women's Invisible Struggle Against Police Violence. And one of the points that I took away from it is if we, the media and others, are not focused on the death of Black women at the hands of police in the same way that we are with men, there are a whole litany of other acts of violence that are committed against Black women that never rise to the level of national prominence, including rape and, more specifically, which happens more often, physical violence against Black women. So taking all that together, it can't just be because it doesn't rate or it's not going to get you any clicks, or is it as simple as that?
So I do think it's as simple as that, actually. When Black men get killed, the idea of the violent Black group is so embedded in the American psyche that everybody recognizes that story. So if you get a story about a big Black man who's being killed by the police, the American public recognizes that trope, and they're going to tune in, not to see whether the Black man is in the right position, but whether or not the police were afraid of him. right? So all the major news stations replayed the execution of George Floyd over and over and over without any regard to the traumatization of his family or the Black community. And they did that because they knew that would bring them in viewers. It was Black execution for white entertainment, right? But you can't get any entertainment out of the death of a Black woman because there aren't any tropes associated with that would appeal to the white viewing public. We have some tropes associated with women, but they're not that. And you make a great point about the other offenses, because we learned just this week that one of the officers who was involved in murdering Breonna Taylor also has some rape allegations against him by women who are alleging that he raped them while on duty. This is very similar to the case of the officer Holtzclaw out in Oklahoma, who raped 14 Black women while he was on duty over the period of about 2 years. And no press story, no major press outlet covered that story until I believe it was Teenage Vogue or one of the teenage fashion magazines posed the question, why wasn't media covering this major story of a police officer raping women, Black women, while on duty and in uniform? And somehow the media didn't think that was important. And the answer to that is no, they don't think it's important.
Kimberly Williams Crenshaw, who's an attorney who talks about intersectionality, kind of touches on this, and I want to throw it your way. The idea that Black women kind of cross in an area, being Black and being female, that many groups, both Black and white, feel are being covered. The issue of Black people and abuse at the hands of police, that's already being covered. The issue of women and how they're abused and the injustices that they face, that's already being covered. And so as a result, where those two issues intersect is a blind spot where Black women exist and so are not specifically being addressed.
So that's true. Professor Crenshaw did a great job with that piece. And I know she keeps her eyes on the issue. She, along with one of my former students, actually, who's Andrea Ritchie and the author of Invisible No More, which is a book specifically about police violence against Black and queer women. But Kimberly wrote that piece many years ago, and she continues to talk about the intersectionality. So it's not like it's a new issue, right? And I forgot who coined the phrase, but it goes something to the effect when you're talking about race and gender. All men are Black and all women are white. So that's the gap that she's talking about, that Black women fall in between, right? We're not Black men, so our issues are talked about under Black, and we're not white women, so our issues aren't talked about under women. The problem is that even within the women's movement, there is a failure to do the intersectional analysis on race. So even white women don't want us talking about our genderized Black female selves within their space. You see, so we never get to tell our stories or talk about how things are impacting us, particularly with regard to the way the police exercise their violent behavior towards us in our communities.
Professor, one of the things that you point out in your research, which I think, again, is become sort of something that I'm glad that we're able to do here on CBSN, which is to talk about how we got here and to talk about why we are where we are today in 2020. Right. And you specifically point to the period after emancipation and how society treated Black women, the imagery that was used around Black women, both in terms of sexual imagery and in terms of whether even Black women were considered honest. And sort of a tag to that, which is, we know that many instances of racial violence in this country have been kicked off by either the perception or the fact of sexual relationships between a Black male and a white woman, right? We're talking about Tulsa, everything from Tulsa to Emmett Till and everything in between and after. But this notion that sprang up after emancipation, and I'm guessing prior to that when, Black people were the property of whites, which is that no one was ever prosecuted, no white male was ever prosecuted for raping a Black woman, and that has lingered to today.
Right. No, that's absolutely
the
true.
notion.
again, this is the difference between police violence towards men versus police violence towards women, right? Because we also experience sexual violence at the hands of the police, which usually Black men don't experience. There have been some exceptions to that, but for Black women, we're going to experience that. And the tropes, the three things that you're talking about, the fact that Black women aren't actually women, they're some kind of beast, the fact that they're licentious, or the fact that they lie, those three tropes, they don't start after emancipation. They start when the colonies made the decision that they were going to treat the status of slavery as different from, for example, the status of indentured servants. When the decision was made that there's going to be a group of people in this nation that don't get to have rights. And so that's really where it starts. It becomes more difficult after emancipation because now we have at least the illusion that we're covered by the language of the law, but the cultural reality and the practice of it is we were still not covered. So you could rape women, you could rape Black women. And of course, if one ever got to the point where a prosecutor would listen to her, then there's always going to be, can we actually believe her? Can she actually be a victim? Yeah. You had a question?
So we have been talking. Yeah, I have one more question for you. The conversation nationally has been about police reform, one of the many conversations. I want to ask you, how do we move this conversation forward? How do we change this so we're not talking about it 10 years from now? What needs to be done, whether it's police, the way the police interact with African-American women, or the media, or how do we change things? Okay.
So that's a really complicated question, and everyone's asking that because media wants a 10-second soundbite on how that can happen. It's impossible. We have to get the police under control, and defund will do that. You can look at the example of the city of Camden. That's been very successful in reducing crime after they broke up their police department, right? But we also have to look at the conditions that lead people to be exposed to the police, to the view of the police. And of course, that's a much more complicated question. Do Black women have safe homes? Do they have somewhere where they can rest their head and know that they are safe at night? Can they provide a place for their children to live safely? Do they have enough food to eat for themselves and their children? And do they have employment that gives them a sustainable wage? You see, these are all factors, as we saw in the Ferguson area, where these factors combine to create conditions that expose our people to the violence of the police. So it's not just the police, and this is the fear I have about the whole demonstrations that are going on, that they're eventually going to be co-opted to be just about, if we make the police do X, Y, and Z. Look at the Democrat proposals that were put forward with the performative kente cloth event. They actually were proposals that were developed in 2014 when Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson. But we're now in 2020. How is it that that is going to be seen as progress for issues that have continued to exist and have grown since the time of 2014? You see, so that's what I'm worried about. To start for the women, America has to begin to think that Black women matter. We do matter. We vote in tremendous numbers. We read like crazy. If there's a blockbuster film that needs to make its bank, it's Black women that's going to put it over the top. We are significant members of the American society, and no one cares when we are killed, right? So it's left to the families and the survivors of these women to keep their names out in the open. There's no database that follows when Black women are killed. There's one that is done by, as you know, hashtag say her name. They've gathered that information about those dozens of women from the family members, but not from any official database. Black women matter, and everyone has to accept that and believe it, and then make sure that we're included as part of the people who are worthy of being treated like human beings.
this has been such a fascinating conversation and educational, even though we read your research and your reporting, Professor. Thank you so much for taking time. I know you said that the media generally wants a quick soundbite, but I'm really happy at CBS News, CBSN, we were able to spend a good 15, 20 minutes talking about such an important subject because the points that you made are so important and people need to hear them. And I'm glad we're able to give it a platform. Again, to our viewers, if you want to read more about Professor Jacobs' research, it's called The Violent State, Black Women's Invisible Struggle Against Police Violence, the University of Florida Law Scholarship Repository. Check it out, please. It's available online. Professor, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for allowing me the time to talk about this issue. Hashtag say her name, Breonna Taylor. Defund the police.